views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
In the month of May, our city has seen a 22% rise in overall index crime compared with May of 2020. Now, that includes felony assault up 25%, and then shooting incidents about 73%. We've seen brazen shootings caught on camera, and it's troubling. Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we discuss how the increase in crime will influence the mayor's race, plus calls to defund the police. Do they have any impact on increasing the crime that we're experiencing? That plus a whole lot more on this edition of Perspectives. And yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, just speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
And hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime, and of course, we thank you for joining us. As always, you can watch Perspectives every week here on BronxNet Television. We also encourage you to stay connected to us on our social media platform at BronxNet TV. And of course, we welcome you to be connected to us on our social media platforms, and that is BronxNet TV, my personal page, Daren C. Jaime on Facebook. And then also we've got Twitter and Instagram at DCJaime23, where you can also be able to share and find out more information. Well, coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we go front and center with the New York City Police Department. Last year, the number of the NYPD stops were down to its lowest ever, under 10,000, almost compared to 14,000 in 2019. Now, despite the drop, the racial disparity remained as stark as ever, with New Yorkers making up 91% of those stopped. And I should say New Yorkers of color, 91% of those who were stopped. Black New Yorkers, who account for 24% of the city's population, accounted for 56% of those stopped last year. So questions still remain when it comes to the issue of the NYPD and also its policing tactics. Joining us now, we're joined by a very special guest, one who is no stranger to our show and one who has been here several times. She's been a contributor, she's an activist, she's a political contributor, and yes, a community activist. Joyce Johnson joins us back here on the show. And Joyce, good to have you.
It's always a pleasure.
Let's go right at it and let's talk about this here. As we talk about these numbers, obviously we see the numbers continuing in some cases of decreasing, but yet and still when we talk about racial tensions, they still remain high.
They do. And I think, we're talking about New York City, but when you look at the whole landscape of the country, racial tensions are high everywhere, sadly. But we're talking about our home and how did these startling numbers come to be? One might argue the police, are police really policing? Are we doing community policing? I don't know that. I don't think we know the state of police. No one, we're talking about the numbers, but the underlying operational component where the mayor or the police, commissioner gets out and does a deep dive into letting us know the origin of these numbers. What are they actually doing? Why, the crime statistics, what do they mean? If stop and frisk, what stop and frisk? How are you doing? What are you doing? We know numbers. We don't know anything about the operation to say, perhaps we can look at reimagine, rethink, retool, because all we do want is public safety, fair and just. And we do know that there's a segment of the population always will, not be law abiding. And I don't want to believe that most people or police believe that segment is disproportionately Black and brown. And that's my worry.
Well,
So prove me, yeah.
No, and I want to jump in here and say that because I do think that when you talk about quality of life, it's an issue for most New Yorkers.
Yeah.
And when you talk about quality of life, you're looking from a perspective that this is what people are actually voting on. They're talking about the economy, they're talking about jobs, and in New York City, the third thing, the quality of life, which deals with crime.
Exactly.
But you have to look at crime and say, is crime going in by one particular color? No. When you make up a minority of the population, but then you're the majority of the people who are sentenced and incarcerated, that's when you begin to see an outcry. And I think that that's what people are really saying. Listen, enough is enough.
Oh no, exactly. You know, the impetus for ending stop and frisk was just that. When it was, you know, in the early years, there were 500,000, you know, Black and brown stopped. And you know, and in considering our percentage in the population, that's what the measure. Like, hold up, are we the only ones? And the short answer is no. And so what it really goes down to, once again, and this goes with the next administration, is there has got to be not just one-sided. This is the way we're going to do this. I don't remember how stop and frisk began, but I do not remember it was, you know, the leaders in community of all communities, all the stakeholders that came up with this, all the stakeholders that weighed in, you know, to say these would be the best practices. I just remember some behind it, you know, there was certainly a tremendous increase in crime. And all of a sudden it became like, well, we're going to do stop and frisk. There are, you know, folks who are not lawful, and the best way to find out if they are carrying guns or whatever is to stop and frisk them for minor things, major things, or whatever.
Yeah, it began under the Giuliani administration, continued under the Bloomberg administration. And we do know that when Mike Bloomberg was running for president of the United States, one of the things that he had to confess was that he thought that stop and frisk was wrong.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you were stopping and frisking, but you weren't coming up with a whole lot. And I think that becomes a problem when you look around and you see that, listen, we're stopping, we're frisking, we're pulling people aside, but we're not really getting what we want to get. Secondly, when we talk about stop and frisk, let's talk about that one word, stop. When we talk about stops, what we're watching right now across America are many questionable shootings, police activity involving communities of color when you have that whole issue of a traffic stop. And a traffic stop should not equate in someone's death. I don't care how bad it is. It shouldn't equate in somebody else's death. But we're seeing that. And so New Yorkers are saying, listen, if this is something that's going to be put back up on, there's going to be some pushback on this and some very serious pushback.
Well, it should be, particularly when your promotion, a commander's promotion, a sergeant's promotion became by the numbers. How many are you stopping and frisk? It was never the quality or the rationale or the reasoning. So you got promoted based on the numbers of your stop and frisk. And so what is that? An incentive to stop and frisk. You know, rule by the numbers, not rule by the quality of, you know, not rule by public safety. And that's where.
Let me take a quick break. Let me take a quick break and come on back. And after the break, what I want to talk about is this. I want to talk about diversity in the New York City Police Department, because when we talk about a new mayor taking office, one of the things that's going to happen is the police chief's job is now in question. Will we find a new police chief? Will he go with Dermot Shea? We'll find out. Listen, we'll talk more on Perspectives. We're coming right back in a few.
media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
And welcome back to the show. Daren Jaime here with you. You are watching Perspectives, the topic of conversation, the NYPD. As crime continues to go up, many questions continue to center around the NYPD. This in particular, as the voting continues across New York City for a new mayor, and as voting continues for a new mayor and the counts are still coming in, and we're trying to wait who officially the new mayor will be, we do know that the one thing that new mayor is going to have to deal with is a new police chief, possibly, and the quality of life issues that affect New Yorkers. Joyce Johnson has been our guest here, and she's sharing a little bit on this topic. And Joyce, let me go here in this segment and talk a little bit about the NYPD. When we talk about the NYPD, one of the things that can honestly be said is that New York has been touted as being one of the most diverse when it comes to rank and file police officers. But then when you go to the top of the food chain and you look at those the high ranking officers, there is little or no diversity with little or no representation from communities of color. We know that it's the people who sit at the top who make the decisions for policing, who make the decisions for policies, who make the decisions for how things are executed on behalf of the department. What do we need to do? This is a real problem.
You just said it. You just gave the prescription. It's not rocket science. Yeah, what happens at the top filters down. And isn't this, to your point, not only in policing, in government, in terms of representation, that is the call throughout the country, and every second, public, private, diversity, men and women who are capable and competent. And so the new the new mayor will have that, and I hope that he or she, person of color or not, takes these things, which we all know are the first basis of some sense of belief and trust in a new system, a new regime, and so I'm certainly going to be one that promotes it, because as we're looking at the diversity in our politics throughout the country, diversity begins at home and throughout the ranks. But also another piece of this, we have really lost the idea of community policing. That beat cop, that sergeant, that police, local precinct captain, who is as well known in the community as you as a pastor, me as a community active, because they are there with the people. There is no longer, that I have said for the longest time, and there has been, I would argue that 80% of our police force do not live in the city of New York. And I think there needs to be a complete switch to that. You work where you live. I work where I live in the community. It means when I work, I come home to a community. And we need more of that, because, forgive me for all making the reference for back in the day, but then back in the day, you would find the beat cop who you would see in the grocery store, who your parents might see at a local, community center, who you would see in church. That was, for us, that was both good and bad, because you see them and they had the parents right there. Joyce didn't do. I was always good. My brothers didn't do. They were diamond on them. I mean, that sounds hokey, but I think that's what we need, because, that is not only what you're saying is, I'm the police officer, public safety, but I'm a member of this community, and I have as much to stake in the development of its children and its people, their safety, as anyone. And why that I'm doing that? Because I'm in the community as well. So that's a big piece for me. Live where you work.
Well, when we look around New York State, a lot of people are still complaining about the residency requirement. You hear that from the public a lot, talking about the residency requirement, requiring police to live in the city that they police and serve. And so we understand that that law cannot be enacted simply because of what goes on downstate, particularly New York City. When we look at what goes on in New York City, you've got police officers who say, I cannot afford to live in New York City. So therefore, I find someplace else to live. And that has been the argument by the police union. And that is how they've been gotten away with that for a long period of time. There has to be some sort of reform in order to do that, but it all goes back to the whole issue of what where do we go from here? Let me just throw it on you.
You just talked about something. There are developments coming up, all over this town. I mean, the sticks are growing up. So what do you do? For those, yes, Mr. Mayor or Ms. Mayor, then for the real estate interests, these mega would a carve out of these, if it's 500, whatever capacity building, then a set aside for police and other essential workers to be able to afford where they work. That's a no-brainer. That's a no-brainer. There was the Michelama program. There's 500,000. This goes back to 30 years ago because I live in a former Michelama. Affordable housing. We can do this where there's a will, there's a way. That's a no-brainer. You've got carve-outs for people of certain income. The disabled. Carve out for public safety workers. And perhaps healthcare workers.
Yeah, and a point is raised here. Listen, even if you can't get the people on the residency requirement, how about this? Some community training, and what if part of that training is working with community-based organizations, working with after schools, working with churches, working along those sides. If you can't live in the community, then you have to do something to be connected to the community. I remember growing up in the projects, we had officer friendly, right?
Exactly.
We knew who our police officer was.
That's exactly right.
Who walked in the projects. And then also, I was a product of the PAL, the Police Athletic League, where we had
talked about that.
To interact with police officers and play with them. So our first interaction with them was not of a negative, but the first interaction with them was with good relationships. So they can have a first name basis. So when they arrive on the scene, even though they have to do a job, there's a little bit of sensitivity and cultural competence. Those are the two words that we need to use, cultural competence, in order to be able to effectuate their job.
You get no argument from me there. Everything you said, what's the term? Everything old is new again. When we're talking about best practices that were tried and true, if we figured it out then, we can figure it out again. And going back to your point of the housing, yes, you can live and work in your same communities. And that should be a call to the next administration. The carve out, 10% of, I don't know what the force is, but wherever you are, if you were working in Brooklyn, every borough have decent, affordable housing set aside for those folks who the public safety sector.
Right. All right. Coming up after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more with Joyce. We're going to continue our conversation talking about the NYPD and the reform that's necessary as we look to a new mayoral administration, that and more on this edition of Perspectives. We're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you. We're talking about the NYPD and the fact that crime continues to rise. What can be done? What are the solutions going forward? Joyce Johnson continues to unpack this with us here on the show. And Joyce, before we went to break, we talked about the NYPD. What can actually be done in order to bridge the gap? Some people say, listen, when it comes to NYPD, living in New York City, one of the things is we have to be honest about New York. It's not attractive. It doesn't look the way that it used to look anymore. If I get a parking ticket, I can pay anywhere between $100 to $175, $200. If I go to a suburb, I've got free parking. The fact that, I could end up paying a parking ticket, getting stuck in traffic, these are things that people are actually weighing out. And so it's more than just the NYPD. I think the city has to really also embrace the fact of some of the challenges that it has in providing a place for people to live.
You're absolutely right. I hadn't thought of, so it is not just the police. I don't enjoy New York City as much as I used to for probably the very same things, but the very same circumstances. Then it takes them the same way we're chatting about this, and that we don't want to get to a place where New York is, 8 million people, and 10 years from now or 20 years from now, it's 1.5 million because everybody says, I'm out of here. Because its vibrancy, its legendary status in the country and in the world, that should not happen. And so it goes back to what we are looking for. I've heard so many platitudes and one-liners in our election cycle from our candidates. We need some deep diving, good thinking people, to come up with different ways and means. I don't know the answer, but it will not be New York unless someone comes up with an answer to some of the problems that you're raising. So it is this new administration, its council members, all elected officials, the governors, the entire political structure, because they are the ones that make the rules of the roads for us to live by. And we'll either be in a wasteland in 30 years with just a few people who can't leave, or we will continue to be a vibrant, want to be restored, vibrant, world-class destination where people want to come and live. And don't forget those of us who must live here because we cannot escape. We just simply deserve better. Is what you're talking about, quality of life. That's why people will stay here. And that's why if it's not there, if it's not present, they will leave. And so that's also a big public policy issue. All of these are for discussions. We have not, our political structure is not having this. I'm a most political person in the world. I've heard more one-liners, with the exception of a few people that I'm going to vote for today. I've heard more one-liners, and those one-liners are used for the campaign. And you never hear the meat behind the one-liners once elected. So there's a lot for us to hold account. Everybody, what you just said, we all feel it. We all know it. We're electing people who better well come to the party prepared to do something about it.
Well, we know that if Eric Adams does pull out and actually becomes the New York City mayor, he does have history being a New York City police officer himself. What do you feel that Eric Adams for mayor, from a police perspective, would bring to New Yorkers and to the NYPD?
Well, I know what Eric has said. So I have not been in Eric's company because his job will be multifaceted. The police, public safety is just but one piece of it. The educational system, the quality of life. And so I'm hoping in all of these things that you and I are talking about, and frankly, a lot of people are talking about the parks, the transportation, all of these things. I hate to say it, and I have said it, we've almost gone back to the 90s where nobody wanted to live in, pre-90s where nobody wanted to live in New York. So it's a lot of restoration. So it's a full package. A major police piece is one component of it. Affordable housing, the healthcare, infrastructure, all of these infrastructure, chapter and verse. So he has the background. His history has been in public safety and policing. But as borough president, he's had to deal with some of the issues that you and I are talking about. It will be on his watch to help solve them with a council and with the elected officials from the statewide support. So I'm not just holding him. He's gonna be held to everything. He's the mayor. The buck stops with him on everything.
Yeah. Well, you understand that with the police background, you think that things would possibly be better. And for some NYPD officers, they feel like that could be a pro. Others say he's not the guy. We'll find out, as the votes continue to be counted. But we do know one thing, and one thing is for certain: the crime continues to rise in New York City, and something must be done about it. If New York City has the highest budget across the nation for the New York City Police Department, and you can't get control on crime, what more can we do?
Fire everyone involved. Sadly, that's either 2 years or 4 years. And I hope that's not the case, but here's where public pressure. You know what? We're paying taxes. So, no. And when we're paying taxes, it sounds like it's voluntary. It is not voluntary. They're going to take my taxes to fund all of this. Every last person who's working and whatnot. We have to be far more vigilant and demanding. And you and I talked about this in the beginning of the segment. I want a better life for myself, the rest of folks, but we, the public, you've got skin in the game. No complaining. There are community boards where you can, roll up to, to say, this is not working. The mayor and his administration works for every last one of us. So that vigilance and demand, don't walk away mad, stay on top of things and be the change that we need.
Yeah.
That's the activism. And that sounds so, oh, well, whatever. No. The squeaky wheel gets oiled. I'm the squeaky wheel. Oil me and make it better so I can run better.
That's it. Joyce Johnson, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Great conversation talking about the New York City Police Department. There's no laughing matter. The crime continues to go and rise, but yet and still, as we look at it possibly, not possibly, definitely a new mayoral administration, the question is, how will that deal when it comes to the NYPD and the quality of life issues? Joyce has provided her perspective. I've given you mine. And listen, we encourage you to share yours. It just might make a difference in somebody else's life. Daren Jaime saying, take care. God bless. Been glad to have you here on the show. We'll talk to you soon.
This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with